Hello, everybody. Yeah. Welcome, everyone. This is the Artists Now, Artists and Guaranteed Income Pilot session. Before we start, I would like to give a brief overview on how to use Crowdcast. If you would like to submit a question to the speakers, please post in the Ask a Question section down below on your screen. It's kind of in the middle, bottom area of your screen. Don't use the chat if you want to post a question. You may also vote on questions already posted by other attendees. So in that same Ask a Question feature, you'll see the questions that people are starting to brainstorm, and you can vote on the ones that you really want the speakers to address. This will help us determine which questions to prioritize. Next, there is a chat box on the right side of your screen where you can hold side conversations. This is where we will post any links and supplemental information about the session or related to the session. In order to keep things moving, we may not get around to responding to any activity in the chat. So please be sure to submit any questions you really want addressed using the Ask a Question function. All right, I am now going to introduce our speakers. Deborah Cullinan, and I want to do this for you all. If you're a visual person like I am, I need to see. So I am going to post this for you in the chat for your convenience. And I will also read it. There you go. So Deborah Cullinan is one of the nation's leading thinkers on the pivotal role artists and art organizations can play in shaping our social and political landscape. She has spent years mobilizing communities through arts and culture. Deborah is committed to revolutionizing the role art centers play in public life and during her tenure at YBCA. She has launched several bold new programs, engagement strategies, and civic coalitions. Prior to joining YBCA in 2013, she was the executive director of San Francisco's Intersection for the Arts. She is co-founder of Culture Bank, co-chair of the San Francisco Arts Alliance, vice chair of the Yerba Buena Gardens Conservancy, and on the boards of the Community Arts Stabilization Trust and Human Made. She is a field leader in residence at Arizona State University's National Accelerator for Cultural Innovation, and a former innovator in residence at the Kauffman Foundation. She currently serves on Governor Gavin Newsom's Jobs and Business Recovery Task Force. So that is quite a bio. Now we're going to also add the bio for our second speaker. I hope that is readable. Laura Sable is the executive director of Springboard for the Arts, an economic and community development agency run by and for artists. Springboard provides programs that help artists make a living and a life, and programs that help communities connect to the creative power of artists. Springboard is a nationally recognized leader in artist-led community development, creative placemaking, and cross-sector collaboration. Springboard recently launched a guaranteed income pilot for artists and creative workers in their home neighborhood in St. Paul, Minnesota. All right, we will begin now with Deborah Cullinan's presentation. Take it away, Deborah.
Great, thank you so much. I'm really glad to be here, and always, just any time I can spend with Laura Sable, I'm excited to do. So I'm going to share my screen. Just give me a second.
Yes.
And here we go. Good, everyone good?
Yes.
So I'm just going to provide a little bit of context.
Wait a minute, it went away.
It went away.
Mm-hmm. It
It's
was
here.
there, and went away.
It's here for me. Let me
There
try.
it is. There it is. There it is.
But it's not presenter view. Is that right?
Right. You just have to click on each slide.
Yeah. See if this. How is that?
Nope, it goes dark.
Okay, we're going to do it the other way then.
Yeah.
And we'll look at it this way, and everyone will be entertained because you can look ahead. So as long as everyone can see it, I'm just going to provide a little bit of context about YBCA and what we're doing as an organization. We are really working on shifting power to artists and arts-driven enterprises working in service of their communities to advance equity, health, and well-being. We are focusing on 4 vital conditions of equity, health, and well-being of communities. These are inspired by something that's known as the 7 vital conditions of health, the properties that are required for people, no matter where they are, to thrive. And we believe that at least 4 of those conditions artists are essential drivers of. And so social cohesion and belonging, community safety, civic engagement, and community identity or community narrative. We're very driven by the basic belief that communities are the builders of the best models for themselves, and that artists are central actors for this work. And this is the way in which we're organizing ourselves. So YBCA, even before the pandemic, was undergoing really significant transformation. As was mentioned, we're really interested in reimagining the role that art centers play in the life of their communities. And a big part of that is how do we shift the resources, shift the power, move away from transactional relationships and toward transformative relationships. So we have 4 pillars that drive the work that we do: YBCA Create, YBCA Champion, YBCA Invest, and at the center and all around, YBCA Engage. For us, this is really about nurturing and growing a thriving creative ecosystem, not only in the Bay Area, but across the country, that really centers artists who are doing this work of equity, health, and well-being in their communities. So just a little bit about each of these. YBCA Create has sort of taken the place or evolved from what was known as a multidisciplinary top-down curatorial structure and moved away from relationships that are really transactional with artists and towards these much deeper game-changing relationships. So it's commissions on-site and in neighborhoods, it's residencies, it's fellowships, it's art initiatives that are really engaging communities, and it's reimagining the place from being sort of a place of passive witness to a true people's laboratory where we can all work hand in hand with artists to try to address the big issues that we face. So at YBCA Create, it looks like Caleb Duarte's The Monument is Living Memory, an ongoing transforming piece of public art that turns our buildings inside out and really addresses the role of monuments, street art in public life. It is the YBCA 10. These are 10 artists that we're working with deeply. Together, they are reimagining our organization with us. They are all working on very large scale projects, looking at racial justice and climate justice. And our job is not to direct them. It is not to focus on the objects they might create. It's to really focus on the kind of community that we can all build together and how that helps us to realize big ideas and our full potential. And so it's really about creating the conditions for people. YBCA Champion, this is really about not only our work actively at the local, state, and federal level in terms of policy advocacy, it's also about gathering the evidence, telling the story, raising awareness of the serious impact that artists have in their communities. It's about building knowledge and growing demand for artists who are doing that work of transforming their neighborhoods, their classrooms, their communities, and really lifting that ecosystem and growing an interest in it and just really helping people understand we can't do this work if we don't work with artists, if we don't lean on imagination and creativity, if we don't think out of the box. And YBCA Invest, which is really what we're all here to talk about, is really about trying to address the systemic inequity and economic instability in the arts sector, but in society. It's not just about artists, and it's not just about the art sector. It's about how we look at ongoing systemic racism, inequity, and economic instability and address it in big ways. So we have a project called Culture Bank, which collaborates with artists and investors to define, test, and scale different kinds of investment strategies, artist first, that really steward these conditions in neighborhoods. The idea behind Culture Bank is that artists are actually early stage investors, and they do the work of creating the conditions for more productive long-term investment. And they're the ones that should design their own investment models. We have an artist-led giving circle. This is a group of about 15 artists from across the country. We were working with them, asking questions about impact investment and what it means to invest in artists. They started to have a conversation about what would happen if one of us was invested in. And the natural response from this artist crew was, no, we'd all be invested in. And so it occurred to us, again, being driven by this idea that communities and artists are the best designers of their own systems and structures, that we just needed to get out the way. And what we did was we invested $250,000 into the Giving Circle. They're the leaders, they're the decision makers, they have the power, they will decide how to invest in their communities, and our job is to support them and hopefully help them raise more money. And then finally, our guaranteed income pilot. We are in collaboration with San Francisco's Mayor, London Breed, and we are in the midst of a guaranteed income pilot. The pilot initially conceived was 130 artists, $1,000, no strings attached, a month for 6 months. We committed to raising more funds so that we could extend that pilot and also launch a new pilot adjacent to it. Very happy to announce that Start Small, Jack Dorsey and his team invested an additional $3.4 million so that we could extend those 130 artists for a full 18 months so that we can really learn, understand what the impact is. And we're also now designing and will be designing with community members an adjacent pilot with at least 5 community-based organizations who will select 10 artists each, and those 10 artists will participate over 18 months. And what we're interested in is, what is a more random citywide pilot like the one we're doing with Mayor Breed look like? What does it look like across the city? And then also, what can it look like in very specific communities? And what happens for the organizations, not only the artists, and what happens in an artist's life, in her family's life, in the life of her community, but what happens to smaller organizations that have consistently been underfunded when their core community is able to be on a path for better economic security. So that is our pilot, and I'm sure we'll have lots of questions, and I think it's time to turn it over to Laura.
Yes. Thanks, Deb. That was so great. It's always really great to hear about all of the amazing work that's happening at YBCA. There's always so much there. How is this going? Can you?
You want to try the presentation mode? There you go. We can see it.
You can see it? All right, excellent. So my name is Laura Zabel. I'm the executive director of an organization called Springboard for the Arts. Springboard is an artist-run organization. We have a staff of 19 practicing artists, and we're based here in Minnesota. Our headquarters are both in St. Paul, Minnesota, and in Fergus Falls, Minnesota, which is a rural community about 3.5 hours northwest of the Twin Cities. Both of those headquarters locations are on land that was and is the homeland of the Ojibwe and Dakota people. Springboard's work really considers art as meaning-making in everyday life, and that really pushes us to a very broad definition of who artists are. We're not an organization that's concerned about sort of picking the 6 best artists in the community and supporting them. We're really interested in the infrastructure and the ecosystem that needs to exist to support creativity and culture in our everyday lives, and particularly the creativity and culture that comes from artists and culture bearers who haven't historically been who haven't historically benefited from the nonprofit arts ecosystem in this country. So specifically Black and Native and Indigenous artists, artists of color, immigrant artists, artists in rural places, queer and trans artists, and artists with disabilities. Sometimes I think about Springboard as an organization that is kind of characterized by things that other people see as maybe in conflict with each other, but that we see as assets. So we are both urban and rural. We are both really place-based and locally focused, and also national. And our work is also deeply practical. Really, a lot of what we do is very practical resources, connecting people with the things they need. But I think our work is also serves as a kind of metaphor and as these signals to the rest of the universe about what other worlds are possible. And I really think that's a lot of what drives me in the work, is the ways in which artists can imagine and build those different futures. And I think that's a thing that a lot of us are interested in right now, and a lot of people want from their cultural community, from the creative people in their midst. Another way that I sometimes describe Springboard's work is that if you imagine artists as a natural resource, as a source of energy and power that exists in every community, on every block, in every neighborhood, in every place all around the world, and that's a source of power for those places, that if we plug into that power, that creativity, there's tremendous energy and benefit for those communities. But just like other natural resources, we need infrastructure to tap into that power. So you can live in a very sunny community, but you don't have access to solar power unless someone builds solar panels. Springboard's a solar panel organization. The sun already exists. Creativity and culture already exist everywhere, but sometimes we need that infrastructure, that ecosystem to plug into it. And our job at Springboard is to tend to that natural resource, to make sure that we can keep that resource healthy, and that people have the access points, the entry points to be able to plug in and benefit from the creativity in their community. So functionally, what does that actually look like to build an ecosystem of support for creativity and culture, for artists and culture makers? I used to have to reach back, over 16 years and give examples from all of these different programs and projects. But now I just have the last year to point to. The last year, I think, has been, I keep saying it's sort of a horrible validation for why this work needs to exist. The last year plus now has really shown us, and I think shown a lot of people, just how fragile artists' lives and livelihoods are, and how much our arts economy, just like the rest of our economy, depends on extractive labor practices, gig work, independent workers, folks who have no safety net, who don't have any of the kind of benefits that would help them weather the kinds of crises that our communities have been through. And at the same time, last year has also, I think, proved to many, many people just how vital and urgent it is for us to be able to make meaning of the world around us, to be able to connect with our own creativity, with our own culture. And I know that for a lot of people, the work of artists has really sustained us over the many crises of the last 15 months. Just some real specific statistics, since I know there may be some of you here who are kind of newer to the idea of artists as workers or artists as small business owners, and really what the last year and specifically the pandemic has meant. There are parts of the artist community, specifically certain disciplines of art, where the unemployment rate is still over 50%. And in the US, 95% of artists have reported significant income loss in the last year. The only upside of that is that this is our work, and this is the work that we've been doing for a long time. So starting in March of 2020, as the bottom fell out for artists and a lot of other people, we were able to take an existing emergency relief fund program that we run that historically serves about 20 artists a year with emergency relief support, financial support, and scale that up. We raised about $1.5 million, and we're able to support 2,500 artists here in Minnesota alone through that fund over the last year. And we also wrote a guide for how to start an emergency relief fund, and we started convening folks and built a network of about 100 different emergency relief funds all across the country, really thinking, as a lot of communities did, thinking about how to deploy these mutual aid strategies as quickly as possible and get that kind of stopgap help into people's hands to help them weather, those early days of the crises. In addition to supporting artists directly with those kind of direct crisis response resources, we also knew that in the midst of all the crises our community was facing, that this is when artists go to work. This is when communities need our artists the most. And so we used a really simple process that we've used historically over many kinds of issues and opportunities in community to resource artists to do small projects in response to these big community issues. So in the wake of the murder of George Floyd by the Minneapolis police, we were able to support a group of Black artists in St. Paul to make art that helped make sure that the narrative, as the national and international eyes were on us, that narrative that was getting told was held by the Black community and specifically by Black artists, and also make projects that helped communities express their rage and their grief and try to make meaning of all that we were experiencing here in the Twin Cities. We also did a statewide project called Artists Respond to Social Isolation that supported artists all across the state of Minnesota to design projects that really were to help address the crisis of social isolation in particularly vulnerable communities. And most recently, we're in the middle right now of a project called Artists Respond Equitable Rural Futures that's supporting artists of color in rural places to do projects that really reclaim that narrative of who gets to say what rural is and who gets to represent rural in the stories that we tell about what that is. All of those projects, both the direct support and those kind of crisis response projects where artists are responding in real time. I'm tremendously proud of that work, and it is the kind of emergency relief and emergency response work that needed to happen. But we're also in a moment now, as a lot of us are, I think, where we're turning our attention to what's next and trying to think about things that are not stopgap or not in the crisis mode, but are more about systemic solutions to the inequities that have been exposed by the pandemic and the other crises our communities have dealt with, and trying to really think more holistically about how we might not just return to normal, but imagine and build that different future. And when I think about the last year and what artists need, when I think about the kind of services, resources that artists need, for me, it always comes back to the idea that what artists need is an economy that works better for everyone. So they need the same things everyone else needs. They need to be able to weather financial emergencies. They need access to healthcare and childcare. They need debt relief, and they need worker protections. And those things can only be accomplished in solidarity with other folks that are working on those issues. And that's how we came to the movement around guaranteed income. Our Mayor Carter in St. Paul, who I know some of you heard from at the beginning of the conference, launched a guaranteed income pilot last fall here in St. Paul called the People's Prosperity Pilot. And that really inspired us to think about how could artists be involved and how could artists also be of service to this movement. So we launched our own pilot. It's a sidecar pilot to the citywide pilot, and it's focused in our neighborhood in St. Paul, and aligned pretty much completely with the city's pilot in structure. So it's $500 a month for 18 months. And we're doing some specific research to really understand the impact of guaranteed income on artists and also on their neighborhood and the kind of broader community impacts of supporting creative folks in that way. And then we're also working with the city of St. Paul to train and employ some artists to help with the city's narrative change work. So I'm sure many of you know a big goal of a lot of these pilots that are happening across the US is to really impact the narrative and how people think about economic justice and how people think about why people need and benefit from a guaranteed income. And here in St. Paul, we're really excited that that's going to involve artists in creative projects in trying to change that narrative. So those will be public projects designed by artists who are from and of the communities, and really designed to challenge people's ideas around how our economy works, around who it works for and who it doesn't, and really help folks understand the benefits, the kind of collective community benefits of a guaranteed income, and how they might help and get involved. So that's the end of my slides. Let's see, there we go. Come back to you all.
Perfect. Thank you for your lovely presentations. You both have blown me away with your profiles and your presentations, because it sounds like you're talking about real paradigmatic changes in how artists are positioned and how the artistic ecosystem is working. So very fascinating, just real eye-opener for me. And so now we're going to take till about 2:35. We want to leave the last 10 minutes of our session for a Q&A with the audience. So we're going to go till about 2:35 to answer a couple questions. All right. The first one is, why focus guaranteed income demonstrations on artists? Why focus guaranteed income pilots on artists?
I mean, from my perspective, I'm the purpose, we entered this space and with a pilot focused on individual artists, I think for two reasons. One is artist specific, which is especially in this moment after the last year, the conditions for artists in this country are so broken that I think it does demand some particular emphasis, and I think it warrants some particular relief. But I think more sort of from the big picture, I'm more interested in artists being involved in guaranteed income broadly rather than a kind of siloed approach. So like a lot of things, I think we're at the very beginning of this. And from my view, we want artists to be at the table. We want folks to understand the benefit of including artists in a broader push towards guaranteed income. And we also, like I was saying towards the end of my slides, we also think artists have a lot to bring to the movement. And I think there's often, even when people recognize that artists have a lot of value in that kind of narrative change or in public perception, sometimes they're brought in at the end to like make the poster. And we kind of don't think about whether they have access to those economic supports or those resources themselves. So I'm really interested in a kind of reciprocal approach where artists are included as workers, as other folks who are marginalized and extracted from by our current economy, and they're called on to sort of help the whole and help the whole movement move forward.
Yeah, I think that I couldn't agree more. And I think in addition to the fact that artists, particularly artists of color, came into the pandemic, extremely vulnerable. And so many of them, like Springboard, YBCA also did an Artist Relief Now program in collaboration with a number of other organizations. And, it's overwhelming when you come to understand just how many artists, particularly artists of color, are living one paycheck or one gig away from a life-changing event. It's profound. And I don't think it's isolated to the arts sector, but I think it's important. And Laura and I have talked about this a lot. Both of our organizations are very interested in piloting and experimenting and demonstrating so that we can learn. And in learning, we can gather evidence that can shift policy. And our interest, I think mutually, is not only to shift policy in our sector, but to be part of a larger movement and to contribute what we can in order to shift policy writ large. And I think in terms of piloting, we do know that it's very helpful to concentrate in a place, to concentrate in a particular community or in a particular sector so that you can really understand the nuance when you're gathering that evidence. And the last thing I'll say, just to add on to what Laura was saying, we also have something called the San Francisco Creative Corps, and we're working on something that hopefully will be California-wide that is also about the essential role that artists can play in meeting people where they are, building trust, regaining cohesion, spreading healthy messages. This is the work that artists do. And what we know to be true is that when you invest in an artist, she invests 10 times in her community. So the ripple on return is profound, and we need to understand that as well.
Wonderful. All right, let's go to our second question. What are some of the important and interesting work that artists in your communities are doing to challenge our understanding of ideas of class, income, poverty, and our economic systems?
You want to go first, Laura?
Sure. I think I talked a little bit about some of the kind of artist responding projects earlier, but I think, I'm particularly interested in this moment in how artists can be of service and can be a part of really building the next system. I think there's, I think this is probably a friendly crowd for the idea that we're not just returning to normal, that this has to be an opportunity for us to build something different economically and in terms of social justice and racial equity and the environment. And I think that piece is really where artists can be employed. So we're working in a number of places around the idea that with ARP funds, that cities and counties can not just support artists as small business owners, but really engage artists as organizers to help build community power, to help communities really name and be the drivers of the change they want to see in their communities. A project that we've done that I think kind of aligns with that is a project we've done over several years now in rural communities called Artists on Main Street. That's really about, kind of taking a creative approach to creating rural main streets that are more welcoming, that create a different sense of belonging, particularly for newer immigrant communities, and that establish a sense of cultural connection and social connection in those places. And that in doing so, have these other maybe more traditional economic benefits of like downtown revitalization, but that come at it through the lens of how are folks in the community in charge of the narrative here? How are folks in the community? How does this place reflect the people who are in the community now? And as new folks come to the community, how are they welcomed and included in the narrative going forward? And not just sort of a narrative that I think a lot of rural communities deal with that might feel kind of frozen in time or narrative that excludes people and makes people feel like it isn't a place where they want to stay or invest or put down roots for the long term.
It sounds like it depends on just who's speaking, right? Who's creating the art that speaks volumes sometimes too.
Yeah, I think that's a really important piece. And it's a thing that I just can't overemphasize when we talk about, sometimes I spend a bunch of time thinking about like, could we talk about this without saying the word artists? Because I just know like what people imagine. And so I just can't emphasize enough that when I'm saying that word, I'm really thinking about people who are from and of these neighborhoods, people who are rooted in the culture of the place and who are creating cultural experiences that really are about the power and agency of the people who live there, not a sort of strategy of importing culture or creativity from someplace else or a kind of external force on a community, but really, the kind of everyday creativity that we all have access to, and that I really think like that's a human right. And it's certainly in this moment, it is so necessary for us to figure out how to make meaning of the experiences that we've shared over the last months and years, and for us to, really take this experience of the last 15 months and use it to motivate something different and to build systems that work better.
Yeah.
It's so powerful, Laura. I as you were talking, I was thinking about specific examples of artists. I was thinking about Binta Ayofeme, who is an Oakland-based artist, and she is reimagining community development. Like, these are artists that are not object-oriented necessarily. They're process-oriented, and they're using their creativity and their power to build new systems and to address the issues that are immediate to them. And, you know, Binta and many other artists in Oakland, in West Oakland, are really interested in looking at who owns and where are the places and the spaces that we need to be able to hold on to. And what is the history that is lost, that is just beneath us? And how can we elevate that history? Because, you know, there's no moving forward if we don't acknowledge what has been. There's a Nikiko Matsumoto, who is a poet and a farmer, and doing just really interesting work around the narrative of how we farm and where our food comes from. Deanna Van Buren, who has an organization called Designing Spaces, Designing Justice, really looking at the justice system in this country and reimagining it through architecture, design, and creativity. There's an amazing artist in Alaska called Kirsty Nami Erickson, who has an organization called Kindred Post. It is an active post office, community center, art space, and place for all of the community to come together to reimagine. Ayodele Nzinga is the new poet laureate in Oakland. Tango Eisen-Martin is the poet laureate here in San Francisco. So you're seeing, you know, poetry, theater makers, visual artists that are all very focused on process and how we address the issues that are intractable and get beyond them, because we are being as creative as we as humans can be. So the last little story is that, you know, one of the artists that we gave money to through the Artist Relief Now Fund is a performing artist, but also she creates social sculptures. She's very focused on the extensive trafficking, human trafficking situation in Oakland, particularly young girls. She wrote to us when she got her $500, and $500 is not a lot of money in the Bay Area. I think it's a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money. You know, she wrote, she said, the first thing I did was go to the store and buy some healthy food for myself. The second thing that she did is she bought supplies for the girls. And she has created social sculptures along this strip in Oakland where this activity takes place. They look just like art objects, but they're hiding places so that she can put things for the girls there, and the men that are trafficking them can't find them. And so that's what she did with her money. And that's why an investment in artists ripples into the community. And that's why guaranteed income is a good idea, not only for artists, but for communities, because we can take care of ourselves and we can take care of one another better if we're in it together.
Great. We have some questions from the audience. One is, what's your vision for the future of our society providing an economic floor for artists? Is guaranteed, and I don't know if you can see these speakers on your side, but then the second one says, is it guaranteed income at the federal level or something different?
Laura and I just had a conversation. Laura, I'm gonna quote Laura because it makes me look good. When Laura and I were talking about this and the idea of piloting guaranteed income, we both feel really strongly that the idea to pilot is not for our organizations to become the providers long-term of guaranteed income. Though I think we both believe that our organizations and others can look more carefully at the economic systems that we perpetuate and understand better how we're using our resources, moving again away from transactional relationships with artists that are highly destabilizing to transformational relationships that are ongoing. But I think, you know, Laura said it better than I would, which is that our aim is federal policy and not just guaranteed income for artists, guaranteed income for all who need it.
Yeah, I agree with myself. And with Deb. Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of what's so exciting to me about the movement for guaranteed income right now, and the kind of clarity that I think a lot of folks who are doing pilots have, that all of these pilots happening in specific communities in place-based ways around particular identities and around particular needs add up to really being able to demonstrate the impact of guaranteed income at all these different intersections and in all these different ways. And it feels really exciting to feel like we're part of this collective effort to do that demonstration that helps then a lot of people who are observing those and learning from them be the people who are carrying that momentum and who are pushing for that change at a federal level. I think, I think that's the goal, is that this leads to policy change. And I think, I'm sure over the coming months and years, there'll be a lot of conversation and debate about whether that belongs at a state level or federal level. But I think it is clear that for it to work at scale, it has to be the government. And I think part of what I'm interested in from the artist perspective, and I think this is definitely shows up in YBCA's work too, is, can we articulate, can we demonstrate some of the other, like, what do we get back from that? So it's not about saying, oh, the federal government should do guaranteed income just because we think they're nice. That's probably not going to happen. But I think if we can demonstrate that there are all these different ways that comes back to the community, all of these different benefits that that accrue to the community, some of which are economic and others are things that, the other thing that I am really moved by around guaranteed income is that it's an opportunity to both say, we live in this economy, we live inside capitalism, and so money, cash matters, and we want to solve for that. And it's an opportunity to say, we can value people outside of their capacity to return economically. People's contributions to their communities aren't always monetary. And especially folks like artists and other culture bearers and people who are working, in their communities, in their neighborhood, have value in all kinds of other ways that maybe doesn't show up in our tax base or in the way that they return economically. And I really love that the conversation around guaranteed income can hold both of those ideas.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I was just writing to thank Ryan for sharing his experience. I think, it's just wonderful to know that it's not only about, a moment of relief, it's about this thing that can actually enable an artist or anyone who's participating in GI, some room, some breathing, some ability to think or grow, or all the things that are so challenging when you're consumed by how you're going to get to the next paycheck.
And I noticed, Deborah, that you answered a question in the chat. Somebody wanted to know how to get in touch with your organizations to learn more about designing the programs. And Laura did as well, so she put the contact info. So we have just a couple more minutes. I wanted to follow up with something you said, Deborah. You mentioned several different pieces of art related to different topics. And I'm just curious if you can just make the connection for us a little bit more about how those projects are kind of challenging our understanding of ideas of class, income, poverty, and ecosystems. If you could just underscore that a little bit more, because they were really fascinating projects.
Sure, yeah. I mean, in the case of someone like Binta and a crew of artists in Oakland, it's about really addressing, through creativity, art, and a creative process, the inequity in community development and community development investment. And it is about creating policies and structures that actually shift ownership. So it's not only a reflection or an illumination of issues that we face in society. These projects and these artists, they tend to focus on actually solving. And I think this is a story people don't know. And one of the things that we in the arts sector really need to do is gather the evidence, because we could sit here for hours telling you stories about Carlton Turner and SIP culture in Mississippi, like these projects that are rooted in art and creativity, that are celebrating the local tradition, storytelling, shifting narrative, but also practically creating opportunities for people and dead on addressing what has been wrong. And I think that's why it's such a powerful time, as Laura said, because we were seeing that more as a society. I think we're coming to understand that role of the artist better. And that's my puppy barking, sorry.
It's okay. So I hear you. It's in the doing that there's the challenges there.
Yeah.
As well as the actual art itself. Wow. So we are wrapping up. Thank you all for attending this session. If you would like to continue the conversation, you can head over to the Kumo space and during the break to network, socialize, and view artists' exhibits. If you enjoyed this session, we have more coming up. So please check out the conference website for the full schedule. And if you missed any sessions, the recordings are available to watch on Crowdcast using the same links from the schedule. All right, folks, I think that does it. That's a wrap. Thank you so much again. You guys are amazing.
Thank you so much.
Take care.